for their first meeting in ACC play. So that's how it all went down out at Alumni Stadium. Now it's time to give out the Pepsi Player of the Game, which there are a few candidates realistically, given the impressive performance by the BC rushing attack. But I think I'd be remiss if I didn't give it to Kai Robichaux. 28 carries, 198 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That tied his career scoring mark, the most he scored in the game, and career highs in both carries and yards, part of the 313 rushing yards put up by BC. Went right through this Syracuse defense. Not a great look for Elijah Robinson's unit. Kai Robichaux, really impressive. Jordan McDonald, definitely a close second there with 15 carries for 133 yards and a touchdown. But instead, it's the Western Kentucky transfer, Kai Robichaux, who takes the cake for his impressive performance. Nearly became the first player since A.J. Dillon back in 2019, first BC player, that is, since A.J. Dillon back in 2019 to rush for 200 yards. Coincidentally, that came against Syracuse as well. All right, just wrapping things up here on Orange Overtime. Some thank yous to give out. Our producer, Hudson Ridley, engineer, Jish Sokolsky, Griffin Bloomstein on radio replay, and of course the entire WAER sports desk. It's a busy week, though, coming up for the original home of the Orange. Next broadcast is on Tuesday, the 12th. That's Syracuse and Colgate basketball. And then next football broadcast is next weekend on Saturday with countdown to kickoff at 2:30. That's Syracuse out west against Cal. Again, 37-31 the final out in Chestnut Hill. Boston College gets the win over Syracuse, and now it's time for the double overtime. Going up until 5 o'clock with Sam Reese and Ryan Bridges. You can call in 315-443-2011. Even go on YouTube, watch it live. Sam and Ryan, not the best look today for the Syracuse defense.
That might be an understatement, Skyler. Disappointing, to say the least, as Syracuse falls to Boston College 37-31. Sam Reese alongside Ryan Bridges gearing up for the double overtime to break it all down. And Ryan, ultimately this came down to SU's run defense not managing to stop a single run all game long for this BC team that absolutely scorched the Orange.
Yeah, it didn't matter what quarter, it didn't matter what drive,
Yep.
It didn't matter what it was. It didn't matter what side of the ball it was on, Sam, too. The offensive line was absolutely putrid for Syracuse. Kyle McCord getting sacked all over the place. The Orange turned the ball over, and it was their demise today.
Well, after a disappointing loss for Syracuse on the road, we do have our reporter on site, Ian Nicholas, who is in Chestnut Hill. He'll join us from Alumni Stadium to give his insight as well later on. That's all coming up on the double overtime, and it starts right now.
The game may be over, but our coverage on WAER is not. Here on the double overtime, we'll be breaking down all the highs.
Handoff Allen. No, he keeps it. Naked bull leg. Schrader walks into the end zone on the near side, and Syracuse strikes first.
Gives to Allen. He's got a lane up the middle. Breaks a tackle and into the end zone for an Orange touchdown.
And that will do it inside the dome. Syracuse starts 4-0 in consecutive seasons for the first time since the 1959 and 1960 seasons.
And the lows.
From opening kick, number 14 North Carolina dominated in all three phases and takes down Syracuse 40-7.
Del Rio Wilson to throw. Over the middle. Kept and intercepted. Ball game for Boston College.
In a season where SU's top target was out for the season in week 2. Its quarterback tearing its shoulder in October, and Dino Babers getting fired in November. The 2023 Syracuse football campaign ends in December. South Florida takes down Syracuse in the Boca Raton Bowl 45-0.
Delivering our hottest takes along the way.
The first 4 games was a great team. The last 3 games was a very bad team. And right now, I have little to no faith in where this Orange team is at.
National television, 4 games in a row. Millions and millions of people have watched Syracuse football over the last month. You have looked terrible in front of a national audience. America has seen Syracuse football fall on its face for a month.
Fran Brown is a home run hire for Syracuse.
Get your voice heard by calling in at 315-443-2011 or by tweeting us at WAER Sports Talk. It's the double overtime, and it starts right now.
And with that, welcome in to the double overtime here on WAER. Sam Reese alongside Ryan Bridges will be with you up until 5 o'clock. So well over an hour to break it down what we just listened to. A 37-31 win for Boston College over Syracuse. The Orange fall and drop their third game of the season to drop to 500 in conference play. And before we start getting into it, Ryan, we want to remind you that you can call into the show. We know you guys have a lot of thoughts. We want to hear them. 315-443-2011. Again, 315-443-2011. We want that landline to be hot all show long. We want to hear your thoughts, but if you don't want to talk to us, there's other options as well. You can text into the show at 315-556-3929. You can also interact with us on Twitter at WAER Sports Talk, and you can watch us if you want to see our beautiful faces on at WAER Sports Talk on YouTube. So a whole lot of options to interact with us throughout the course of the next hour plus. And Ryan, we have to get straight into it because I think saying this is a disappointing loss for Syracuse is an understatement. This is a bad Boston College team, and Syracuse couldn't get the job done. And I point immediately to the run defense, which made absolutely no adjustments. They were destroyed. 325 rush yards allowed. Inexcusable.
Wait, 325. That's not Kyle McCord's passing yards, right?
Correct.
We're talking about Syracuse's run defense allowed 325 yards.
Unreal.
And it didn't come just through, a run here, a run there. It was 20, 10-plus yard runs, one after another with the same running back, relatively the same gaps and holes that they were trying to go after, and Syracuse could not find a single hole to get a man in there. And then when Kai Robichaux, the BC running back, would bounce it outside, there was constantly a Syracuse defender who would miss a tackle, who couldn't get that shoestring, and he got to the second level on at least a third of his carries today.
Oh, at least. Maybe even more than that, right?
Maybe a half, yeah.
It was unbelievable. And the thing that's most frustrating is that BC made it obvious. You knew coming into this game that they were going to run a lot. I mean, Castellanos hasn't been, great all season long, and it was a very windy day. I've been told it's been windy like a million times, so I'm gonna ask about that with our reporter Ian Nicholas later on, who is in Chestnut Hill. But it was made clear to us here in our Ostrom Avenue studios that the wind was playing a factor in this one, so you knew the Eagles were not going to throw the ball that much. And even crazier, they just used two running backs. There was nothing unpredictable, really, about what they were doing. Kai Robichaux deserves all of his flowers. Skylar was 100% correct in awarding him the Pepsi Player of the Game. He had nearly 200 yards. But then also, Jordan McDonald, Ryan, he comes out of nowhere. I mean, he had only played in one game so far this season. That was Duquesne, where he had 5 carries. He comes onto the scene. He had 100 yards by halftime. He finishes with 133 and a touchdown. I mean, that was crazy as well to see him, who hasn't played at all this season, just make the Syracuse defense look terrible, really.
Well, we come into some of these games, Sam, and we always say, okay, this is what this team does really well. Mm-hmm. But what those stats tell you, what the stat of Kai Robichaux only having 270 yards all season coming into today, you mentioned the 50 yards that McDonald has on the entire year.
Unreal.
That shows you that was not the BC bread and butter. It was just that
Correct.
Syracuse struggled on the defensive side of the football, and it's not the first time that we've seen Syracuse really struggle. They struggled in that Ohio game to contain the running back on the other side, but that was more of a tackling problem. Syracuse had guys in the gaps who were ready to tackle in the second level. They just didn't make the plays. They could not get past a single BC block, and the offensive line for BC dominated.
That's a good point, because I happen to be on that Ohio double overtime too. So it seems like whenever
lucky you.
Whenever the Syracuse rush defense struggles, I happen
Maybe
to
it's your fault, Sam.
It might be my fault, but you're 100% correct, because from that Ohio game, I remember it being just poor tackling all around. A lot of yards after contact from Ohio, but this was different, where Syracuse couldn't even get its hands on whether it was Robichaux or McDonald. They were just, bursting through the middle most times, and by the time the Orange players reacted and got by this offensive line of BC, it was way too late, and you were seeing 30, 40, 50-yard gains from this Boston College team to drive downfield. And my main point here, Ryan, is that sure, it hasn't been the bread and butter running the ball off for BC, but considering it was a windy day, considering in that first quarter, the first 120 yards BC picked up on offense were on the ground, that made it clearly obvious that they were going to continue doing this all game, and the Orange just couldn't react and adjust.
And Jordan Leonard on the call for us on WAER was saying that they've really got to force BC to throw the ball, and they weren't really doing so early, but as I kept watching them in that second, third quarter, Sam, you constantly saw 7, 8 defenders in the box, and BC is still going back to the run because they know that Syracuse can't stop it. That's the mark of a team that really has no answer, and they didn't make any in-game adjustments to try to rectify what they've done in the first half. It was just an ugly showing from this team, and you really have to worry about going up against Cal next week and one of the best running backs in the nation in Jaden Ott.
Right, and you look at how that first half played out, Ryan. Thomas Castellanos, he had 2 complete passes. 2. Yet
Right.
BC's offense was scorching Syracuse and continued to do that. They threw the ball a few more times in the second half. 5 more passes in the second half once Grayson James came in. But I think that proves my point, where it did not matter who was in at quarterback for the Eagles. I mean, if it was Thomas Castellanos, Grayson James, nobody cared. I mean, the first drive, if I remember correctly, that James went in for, BC needed 3 plays to go 75 yards downfield. All 3 plays were runs, and they got into the end zone. It didn't matter who was taking the snaps in the backfield, because the run game was just taking over for this Boston College team, and that's inexcusable for Syracuse.
And it almost worked against Syracuse that BC attempts no field goals on the season. They missed the 29-yarder at the very start of the game.
Right.
That would have put them up 3-0. That prompted BC, even more than they were before, to go for it on every single fourth down that they had possible. But that worked in their favor because they knew that they could hand the ball off 4 times in a row, and almost every single time, especially in that fourth quarter, you saw them pick it up. And when you get down to those 3rd and 2s, that's when you really have to convert. Syracuse got them into that 4th and 1, and then they couldn't convert on top of that. It worked against Syracuse that they were always in 4th down territory.
Yep.
And that's what decides the game. It's those short yardage situations, those key downs, mano-a-mano. We line up and we see who can impose their will. And BC, and we'll get into this, did it on both sides of the ball.
They did. Both sides of the ball. I want to delve into more of that in a moment, because we've been talking about how on the defensive side, the D-line for Syracuse just couldn't make a single stop all game long, and BC continuously in that second half converted on 3rd down, even 4th down. Syracuse just simply didn't have an answer. We want to know how disappointed you guys are with this Syracuse defensive performance, because it was ugly as they allow 37 points. Give us a call, 315-443-2011. You can also text into the show at 315-556-3929. 37-31 the final score as BC takes down Syracuse in Chestnut Hill. Sam Reese alongside Ryan Bridges. Ryan, I can sense you want to say something. Give it to me.
Dare I say, this is the most frustrating loss of the whole season. More than Stanford, in my opinion, because that was
you could argue it.
That was a game in Stanford that Syracuse had to shake off the rust. Yes, they were not playing against a very good Stanford team. They're playing against a Stanford team that still only has 1 win in ACC play. It was against the Orange. But in that game, you saw Syracuse find themselves. They had a chance to win it on the last play. They got thoroughly outplayed today, and they had no answer for a very one-dimensional offense. And I just think watching this from a perspective of, okay, what would a Syracuse fan want in this situation? you have to say that this was the most embarrassing loss of the season.
I think you can say it, but let's not say they didn't have an answer. They scored 21 unanswered points to take
They didn't
the
have
lead.
an answer on defense is what I mean. They didn't have a counterpunch.
From a
they
defensive perspective, sure.
And that's the frustrating part, too, because
that is what cost
despite even the offensive line playing so poorly for Syracuse on the other side, you still have such great weapons. You still have
McCord still threw for about 400 yards.
I was impressed with him today. I mean, it sucks that he lets go of the football that should have got returned back for a touchdown. Instead, Ezaraku kicks it out of the back of the end zone. It's a safety. Ended up working out really good for BC because after the ensuing kickoff, after the safety, they're up 2. They score a touchdown. They go up 9, and that's when the game got really put out of reach for Syracuse. They had some chances to win, but they needed them to, get that stop. And eventually, the backup quarterback for BC and James found his receiver in the end zone. So that was really iced it. But that safety just changed the whole momentum of the game because
it did.
Syracuse was getting back into
21
it.
straight points.
21 straight points. It's now tied up 21-21. You felt good about what the offense was doing. They actually figured out how to change up their philosophy to work around the bad offensive line. It was those in-breaking routes over the middle, and I'll let you go in just a second. They were able to find the solution to the offensive line, and as soon as they did, the offensive line collapsed. And then they fell apart.
That's why I don't think they ever really found a solution. Because the offensive line was still exposed multiple times in that second half. And to your point, the safety was the turning point. I mean, as much as we want to say, Kyle McCord still managed to throw for about 400 yards. There's still enough offensive weapons to get it done. That absolutely is the turning point right there, where the offensive line can't protect McCord. What happens? He loses the ball on a sack. It's kicked into the end zone for a safety. BC gets it back, goes down in a couple of plays, maybe 3, I believe, to score. In the blink of an eye, that was a 48-second drive, and just like that, boom, it was a mistake offensively that cost Syracuse, and BC, the way they were running the ball all game, trudges down. That's 9 points in less than a minute that the Eagles score, and Syracuse could never come back after that. So I do think there's a good amount of blame that has to go on the offense for this performance, even though you have to put the defense at the forefront.
You're gonna put it on the offensive as a whole, because I don't think this is on Kyle.
The whole line. No.
This is not on Kyle.
Let me reiterate.
Okay, go ahead.
Basically, none of the blame is on Kyle McCord for this afternoon. I will say, there were a few instances early on in the game in the first quarter where it didn't seem like he was in a rhythm. Part of that had to do with the O-line where he was zipping some passes over the head of some receivers.
He's running for his life.
True, but, a 2nd and 21 to Pena where he just sends a laser way over his head. I think it was a little frustrating early on for McCord.
That's true.
But he did settle in later in the game. In the offensive line is where you have to 100% put the bulk of the blame on. I mean, McCord was sacked 4 times. As much as we were harping on the D-line of Syracuse, the O-line has to be given just as much blame because it seemed like every play, Ryan, McCord was under pressure. He did as much as he could, to make plays out of that. But you got to give your QB more time in that pocket because it seemed like he was under pressure snap after snap, play after play. It can't happen.
So what did they do? Because you mentioned that you don't think that they ever worked around the issue of the bad offensive line. I'm saying that their play calling, let me finish, that their play calling changed the way the offensive line changed the way that they called plays in this game. Their first drive out of the half,
I think that's a
Kyle
fair
McCord
point.
goes Trevor Pena 5 yards on a quick screen. Then he goes to him on an out route.
Yeah.
He gets the first down, another 5 yards. 5 yards to Pena once again. Then later on the drive, he goes to an in-breaking route with Jackson Meeks. He went to the same one on a Darryl Gill touchdown too. So once they started to use the middle of the field more and they stopped waiting for those outbreaking routes deep down the sideline to really materialize, this offense started to pick up steam and go down the field. That's when you saw LaQuint Allen mix in. And I'm like, that drive where they scored and made it, I believe it was 21-14, that was the quintessential drive. And if they could have just held on to that.
But they couldn't. The offensive line was still exposed.
I still think that they worked around it.
At points, yes. And again, like you can't blame the offense for too much. Considering how bad the O-line was, I will say, to put 31 points on the board is pretty impressive. The embarrassing part, first and foremost, is allowing 37 to Boston College. I do have to put that out there. But with that being said, this was a game where you kind of you kind of force McCord to be in a position where, he had to take some risks, and he's talented enough, and there's enough talented weapons where you spread the wealth pretty good, where Gadsden and Meeks impressively both had over 100 receiving yards. So yeah, you have to tip your cap there. I do think they kind of adjusted on the fly and did their job, but the O-line still has to be better because a mistake.
Oh, no one is going to disagree with you on that.
Sure, but this is my point, Ryan. The little things like that is what needs to improve. Again, you can point to the defense all you want, but it's little things like that on offense as well that could have won Syracuse this game. They were rolling with those 21 unanswered points, but in the end, it all backfires with that safety midway through the third quarter where momentum was completely on your side. It flipped in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, it really did. And, but this team all season has survived on just outshooting the other team.
You can't rely on that.
I know you can't rely on that. I was right with you.
Sure.
On the defensive side of things, I said it was embarrassing. There's no other way you can really chalk it up. They had no answer, and you just hope that, the personnel is not going to change. You're, what are we, 9 games into the season now?
Yeah, you can't.
The personnel,
it is what it is at this point.
Yeah, the personnel is not going to change. You just hope that they can find a solution, and they can find a way to hit these gaps and clog up running lanes. Otherwise, there's going to be more running backs that just run all over this Syracuse defense. I brought up Jaden Ott. There's some really talented playmakers on Miami that are also going to gash this defense. I see a lot of problems for this Syracuse team coming down the stretch, and when they hit that 6-win mark, you think about Virginia Tech being a similar caliber team to BC. Virginia Tech beat BC.
Sure.
You think, they could win out.
BC's worse.
They could win out going into that Miami game.
Nope. They could very well win. They could lose 2 of the last 3 games.
They very well could. And you would have penciled in that Cal game if they won today as a Syracuse win. We can't really do that anymore because they just have problems that I think are almost unfixable right now unless we see just a drastic change.
And it's unfortunate because it's the month of November, and this has been a month where Syracuse has struggled historically. Boston College is not a good team. They came in on a 3-game losing streak. They were playing bad football, their worst football of the season after getting off to a 4-1 start. Their only ACC win, Ryan, was against Florida State, the worst team in the conference, which is a whole nother topic in its own. But, an FSU team that is 1-7 in ACC play, that it cannot happen. This loss today. And we do have our first caller of the afternoon, which we've been anticipating. We got Stan from Solvay, who wants to talk about the reason they lost this game. Stan, what do you got for us?
Hey there, guys. Actually, I like your show a lot. I listen to it all the time. I love this team, so don't get me wrong. But so what we've seen this year is we immediately saw problems with the defense. Now, the defense has done some good things too, but there's problems with it. They need to fix it. It was eventually going to surface later on, and it is now. Look what Boston College couldn't stop. They couldn't stop the run. Obviously, if the defense played a little better, they probably would have won the game. And the offensive line, that's minor. That's another little problem too. Obviously the special teams and stuff like that, but really that defense, if they could just perform a little better, you got Kyle now going forward. Kyle McCord, he's not going to be here next year, so now we got to replace something like that. It's going to be rough, I hope they could fix this this year and going forward. But those are those problems that I saw right from the get-go, and they're still there.
Stan, one quick question for you. Does this change your confidence level for Syracuse going into these last 3 games of the season? Are you less hopeful about them going down the stretch?
You know what? I'm actually not. I've got a positive outlook, and I'm not. But, I'm concerned, and I'm not. I still think with a guy like, with Kyle McCord and his weapons, and we've got some really good talent, but they still can do they just got to fix things right now, and then eventually make them even more quality as the season or as the the new regime goes on here. So, but I still have pretty much a lot of confidence with them. They should have. This game is a frustrating. They should have won this.
I said the same thing off the top, too.
Should have won for sure. Stan, we really appreciate you calling into the show. Thanks so much for your support of the program here on the Double Overtime. And I get what Stan is saying, Ryan, I do. But where I have to push back a little bit is that the fact that this result happened in the month of November, where we're towards the end of the season, where you should... As Stan said, as you've said, and as we've all said, Syracuse should have won this game, but they didn't. That's the issue here, where you're playing a Boston College team that you should beat, you have to beat, and they didn't get the job done. That's why I say I don't have any faith in this team the rest of the way.
No faith. So what is your outlook for Cal? We'll get into this later, but you have more or less confidence going into this?
You have to have less. This is a game you should have won. You have to win. BC is a basement dweller in the ACC.
Right.
You heard, if you listen to the game, Tyler Aiken and Jordan Leonard did a great job on the call. Tyler's final call. You heard it. First time in a decade Syracuse has lost at BC. That's a place where, I've been hearing rumblings that it was a good atmosphere. I find that hard to believe. Probably with more Syracuse fans, though. That's not even an away game, in my opinion. That's always a pretty
And that's coming from someone who's
atmosphere.
from Massachusetts.
A Boston area native in myself, where Boston College is taken as a joke of a football team. Year in, year out. And again, they were on a 3-game losing skid.
Yeah, that's exactly the same thing. Is like the team that we are accustomed to seeing with Syracuse going on these long losing streaks at the end of the year. That's what BC is right now, and they haven't lost against great teams either. So you come in as a Syracuse team, and you will lay an egg to the team that's just been laying eggs the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, and the one other thing I'll say is, I appreciate what Stan mentioned in terms of, McCord did his job. The offense did enough to win this game, but that's the problem. That we're in November, and the offense does its job for the most part, putting up 31 points, and you still lose to a Boston College team that's not good, and you still concede 37 on defense.
That's even the thing, because we talk about the battles in the trenches, but we wouldn't be harping on the offensive line as much as we are right now if the defensive line could have just done a little bit of a better job early on in the game, didn't put them behind 14-0 when BC is going for every fourth down they possibly can,
right?
And you can't make a single stop.
Well, we've been harping on the defensive line quite a bit, the offensive line as well. It was also another slow start for Syracuse in this game where they had to play from behind. Penalties were a factor. We're going to dive into all of that after a quick break here on the Double Overtime. You won't want to go anywhere. Stick around, guys.
Hi, this is Kevin Cummins, your co-host on Beale Street Caravan. Next time on the program, we'll have an extra special feature on the Oxford American Magazine's music issue. This year, they focus the entire issue on the blues. It's going to be a real treat, so don't miss it. That's next time on Beale Street Caravan.
Saturday evening at 6 on 88.3 FM WAER.
88.3 WAER, bringing news that matters to you, making you better informed and better connected to your community.
Well, reimbursement's probably the number one barrier to use of telemedicine. Very recently, for instance, hospitals no longer get reimbursement for telehealth, but the professional fees continue to be paid to the physicians. I think that's a big issue.
Find our full program schedule at WAER.org.
Thanks for listening. Not a member yet? Make a first-time gift today and help empower WAER to provide trusted journalism, music discovery, and community conversation for all, no matter where you live or how you listen, from broadcast to podcast, on air and online. Members help power everything you find at WAER. Please give today at WAER.org to support this work. Selling a vehicle on your own, especially nowadays, can be a hassle, but donating it to WAER couldn't be easier. Simply provide a clean title and we'll take care of the pickup and donation receipt. To get started, visit WAER.org.
Who's gonna drive you home tonight?
Good times. Laughing, splashing, swimming, diving. You can play in the water. But never forget, The water does not play. On the next Snap Judgment, you're going to get wet because Snap Judgment proudly presents Waterworld. Snap Judgment, storytelling with the beat. Do not miss it.
Sunday morning at 10 on 88.3 FM WAER.
The Robo Show off the right tackle, has some room to run, and he's into the end zone for a touchdown. That was too easy for Boston College. Backup quarterback in. They run the ball all the way down the field to answer SU's touchdown on its first possession.
Welcome back into the double overtime here on WAER, your postgame show breaking down everything Syracuse related, Syracuse football related, as they fall to Boston College 37-31. Ryan Bridges and Sam Reese talking with you up until 5 p.m. We've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about the offensive line, defensive line struggles for Syracuse. We're going to go into how they got down 14-0, but all the above, whatever you want to talk about, you want to join the conversation live on the air with us, we'll let you have the floor, go as long as you want. Give us a call, 315-443-2011. Those are the digits you got to hit in order to get on the air. You can also text us at 315-556-3929. And also check us out on YouTube. You can see me and Sam interacting in the studio if you want to get more of a visual representation of our frustration after this Syracuse loss. And we've harped on it a lot, Sam. But the offensive line, defensive line struggled from the very start of this game. Yeah. Syracuse goes down 14-0. What stood out to you in the first quarter that Syracuse now just has not been able to score in the first quarter going back for the last 3 games?
Well, I think from an offensive perspective, Ryan, again, we did harp on the offensive line a lot, but that was an evident issue from the start where Kyle McCord was having to rush it out of his hands and he was pressured constantly. But I will say there were also instances where I just felt like the offense as a whole wasn't ready for the moment. The first couple of drives, Ryan, it was not like they were completely out of sorts, but weren't ready for the occasion, in my opinion. I don't know if it was, the noon start or whatever. I mean, no excuses whatsoever, but I can't really explain fully why this team has struggled with slow starts. But I did feel like a lot of times, I hit on it a little earlier, where I felt like McCord was a little off sync with some of his receivers too, with just some throws that were high. Not everyone on the same page. I think that's what it came down to on those first few drives where nothing was going right for the Orange offensively. I don't know how you felt in terms of McCord and his receivers being on the same page in the early stages, but something was off. And this has been a constant theme as of late, too. Even the Virginia Tech game where, they ended up coming back, but that was an extremely slow start, too.
Nothing was more frustrating, Sam, when watching this game than watching that first drive.
Yeah,
you think about it. They get the screen pass out to LaQuint Allen.
Yeah.
He gets 9 yards. They throw the little in-breaking route to Justice Ross Simmons. He gets 18. They run it with LaQuint Allen for 3. All right, you're set up 2nd and 7. They throw an out-breaking route to Rondé Gadsden. He slips and falls on the route. And then on 3rd and 7,
they run the ball. What are you doing?
They run the ball when Kyle McCord is dicing up the defense with his arm.
Yeah.
It is a classic passing situation. It's another in-breaking route to Trevor Pena, get you 5 yards, and then on 4th and 2, do what you want. You want to run the ball up the middle, I'm okay with it. You got LaQuint Allen, you're early on in the game, you don't know what's really working yet. That's my point, is that drive really personified how Syracuse just blew certain drives. They had such great gains at the start, and then they just couldn't materialize anything.
It's so true. I mean, that opening drive, just a great representation of, I think, all Syracuse football fans saying, oh, you got to be kidding me. Another one of these sort of starts offensively where they're just not clicking all around and that final product isn't there. Because oftentimes with the amount of talent this team has, especially in the passing game, there's so many glimpses, Ryan, of what they can do. But that's another thing. And you're 100% right to bring it up. Some of the play calling, I mean, what are we doing? That 3rd and 7 that you mentioned, where you run the ball, I don't understand it at all. I mean, I think Allen picked up 1 yard. Never in a million years, unless there was a gap from BC's defensive line. I mean, maybe if it was Syracuse defending, BC would get a first down there, other way around. But unless BC made a bad mistake on the defensive line, there was never going to be a gap there for Allen to pick up the first down. That's just conservative play calling early on in the game, and I don't get it because Fran Brown stressed that the starts of this game need to be better. You can't rely on coming back in games. Like, as great as that comeback against Virginia Tech was, Ryan, you want to see your team fresh out of the gates. You want a full 60-minute performance, which is what you need against some of the top teams in the ACC. This is a bad team in the ACC in Boston College, and you still started slow out of the gates.
And the thing is that they got into such bad offensive positions throughout this game.
Right.
And they got bailed out because Kyle McCord is such an accurate QB. He goes down the sideline to Darryl Gill, who catches it in the first quarter. I think it was like a 3rd and 21. Mm-hmm. And they connect. The way that Kyle McCord and these receivers are able to bail them out in certain situations just makes me so frustrated.
It covers up a lot.
I think that's what Stan was alluding to was the Syracuse team has so many deficiencies. Mm-hmm. Now you're going to have those deficiencies next year, but you won't have a quarterback who's going to be able to plug up those holes in Kyle McCord. No. The person you bring in is likely not going to be as good as Kyle McCord. No. And so that's the frustration is if you surround this guy with the right pieces, he can get you to a double-digit win season. That Stanford game was a winnable game. This was a winnable game, and we're stuck here saying the same thing because they can't do the little things right.
It's the same thing, and it's unfortunate because – I truly thought, Ryan, that it was an issue that was a Dino Babers era issue where they couldn't do the little things, and that's why they were losing these wins.
They were undisciplined? We can get into that.
Oh, let's get into that.
Let's
because
do it.
It's November, and this team is still getting penalized left and right. Today, 8 penalties for 71 yards, a week removed from 11 for over 100. Again, last week they got bailed out by all of those penalties by coming back and winning in overtime. But penalties absolutely played a role in this game, Ryan. There were multiple instances where I'm scratching my head saying, how is this team still so undisciplined under a new head coach in the month of November where it's the final stretch of the season? How haven't they fixed these issues? And again, this goes back to the frustrating start to this game, Ryan, to your point. I look at in the first quarter, second drive of the game.
Yeah, I know exactly where you're going.
Kyle McCord, out of all people.
3rd and 6.
3rd and 6. He runs 48 yards. I think we're all going crazy. If you're a Syracuse football fan, you're going, my goodness, McCord just ran half the length of the field.
He looked very fast on that play, too.
Kind of. Yeah, sure. I'll give him some credit. Well. I mean, that was impressive. He runs 50 yards down the field, and you're saying, first down deep into BC territory. But guess what? There's a flag on the field, and it's all coming back deep into your own territory. Right then and there, Ryan, I'm shaking my head saying it's the same thing over and over, and the penalties continue to play a factor the rest of the way. That really set the tone for what would be another undisciplined game. I mean, and I don't get it. Again, it's not like you're in a hostile environment. It's Boston College. You're at Alumni Stadium. It's barely an away game. I'm sure there were more Syracuse fans there. The excuses, there's none. There's none there.
I feel like you have more cachet to say that as a Boston area native than I do. But when it comes to the penalties too, some of them were just out of frustration.
Correct.
They was just not being able to control your emotions.
Yes.
Elijah Clark, I believe, is dragging Kai Robichaux out of bounds. He's holding him while he's in bounds. He realizes that he's out of bounds, and then you see him, throw him that extra little shove. And I get it. They're running all over you. It's extremely frustrating, but you throw him into like the training equipment on the sideline. Not only is that just extremely dangerous.
He could have injured him, yeah.
Yeah, like he crashes in with, the parts that his pads are not covering him up. So not only is it extremely dangerous, but it tacks another 15 yards on top of that play, and I just can't understand that type of stuff. It didn't do anything, but you remember the punt that they were lining up for was 4th and 9, and the Syracuse Davian Kerr just jumps off sides
by like 3 yards. I mean, it's the most obvious offsides I've ever seen.
And I get it, you're trying to block the punt, but again, field position is so important, especially in a game where your offensive line is struggling so much.
Yeah,
and it's just undisciplined plays time after time with this team. And then the play to win it. I'm sure you're going to allude to that.
Yeah, well, that too, absolutely. The play to win it is another example of a penalty. But I mean, I could really break down a majority of these penalties where all of them you have to put the blame on Syracuse, Ryan. I mean, I even look early in the fourth quarter where Justin Barron committed a terrible face mask penalty. That's 15 yards right there, and that ultimately was the drive which led to that genius play call, by the way, on 4th and 1 from SU's 18-yard line where, Syracuse is completely thrown off guard and Grayson James finds Jeremiah Franklin wide open in the end zone to ice the game.
I will push back on that one. I think there was a lot of bodies in there. He was reaching around trying to grab his shoulder pad, and I think he ducked the BC ball carrier ducked his head down, and Barron just caught or it could have been Marlo Wax, honestly, but he tucked his head down, and then you don't care?
No, I don't care.
I mean, penalties are going to happen. They're not going to have zero penalties.
You can't have 8 penalties, though.
You can't have that many. And we've heard from the bad ones.
Especially the one you were mentioning with Clark, where Robichaux already picks up 41 yards on that carry, and then just because you're frustrated, you shove him afterwards. That's another 15. That's essentially, I'm doing quick math on the spot. It's not a good idea. 56-yard gain. Right there. When you added 15 that didn't need to be added on. And that was, by the way, the 3-play drive where BC went 75 yards downfield in 49 seconds to find the end zone and tie the game. I'll go back to the little things like that, Ryan. I get what you're saying. This team is not going to have 0 penalties, but when those penalties add up to 8 in the end and you lose this game by 1 possession, you have to bring it up because it's been a constant issue all season long.
And you know what also is the funny thing is that Elijah Clark was here last year. Mm-hmm. Justin Barrett or Marlo Wax, whoever had that foul.
Know.
They were here last year. They're the captains of this team. Yep. Fidel Diggs on the onside kick. I understand you might not know that, okay, you got to block that. I'm going to be honest, I didn't know that was a penalty either. I think a lot of Syracuse fans on social media were also a little surprised with it.
Sure.
But nevertheless, it's in the rules, and Fidel Diggs is also one of the leaders on this team. So it's not just happening to their inexperienced players. It's happened to some of their biggest veterans, and that's also really disappointing.
It is, because as much as, with Fran Brown coming in as the new head coach and with a lot of new names on this team, you're 100% correct. We're on the defensive side of the ball. A lot of the key players are returners, or a guy like a Chestnut who happens to be back with the team. And you'd think that they're at the point where they're veteran leaders of this team, and they were frustrated with, those type of mistakes that happen under Dino Babers, where they'd be mature enough and understanding enough that, the culture needs to change. The mistakes like that have to go away, yet they're still the guys making these unforced errors, really, that has nothing to do with the other team. It's all their own wrongdoing, Ryan, and that's where you say, what the heck? It's the month of November, and we're still talking about this.
Frustrating mistakes under Dino Babers, still frustrating mistakes with Syracuse football under Fran Brown. The Orange fall today 37-31 to Boston College. They dropped to 6-3 on the season, 3-3 in ACC play. Ryan Bridges and Sam Reese breaking it all down with some shaking heads. If you want to join the conversation, express your frustrations with the Syracuse loss, maybe express some positivity for the Orange going down the stretch. Still 3 games for the Orange to go and really make something of this season. A lot is still in front of them. Yeah. If you want to share those thoughts or any other thoughts that you have about what we were talking about in the last block with Syracuse's offensive and defensive lines, give us a call at 315-443-2011. You can text us at 315-556-3929. Also join us on YouTube at WAER Sports Talk. Also have a lot of polls going up on our Twitter as well, so if you just want to see what other Syracuse fans are thinking at this time during a really frustrating loss where the Orange dropped their second game in the last 3. Sam, we talk about these penalties and time and time again. Do you think there's a way forward where this team can become more disciplined?
Nope.
No?
We're in November, so clearly nothing.
Okay, but
nothing's going to change. We're at the point where you had
But we
to
said
clean
that
this
we
up
said
by
about
now.
the offensive line because it's about personnel.
Okay.
Penalties are technique, they're discipline, they're coaching.
We're 9 games in, and the same things are still happening. Why would I have a different mindset heading into the last 3 games saying, yeah, they're finally going to learn from their mistakes when they're still continually
I still have faith that
that
Fran Brown, after every loss, has bounced back with something inspiring, and he has led his team to a win. I still take some positivity in that. I think he's a first-year head coach who's just trying to get through a tough stretch for Syracuse where things are falling apart for them. But I think penalties are certainly something that they're going to clean up.
I mean,
you see him chewing guys out on the sideline. They're not.
It's not working.
They're not relishing it.
They keep making those mistakes. I
don't see the same weak-minded team that I saw out there last year. If you think this is a Dino Babers
last week
mentality, then
sure.
I just vehemently disagree.
No, I'm not saying that. This team has a different attitude, but there's only so much, having that attitude where, we'll never give up. We're going to fight to the end, which they did last week in an incredible comeback against Virginia Tech, which I think would never happen. But it's one thing to do that, but another thing to have that attitude, but still making these mistakes. That's why I still don't have the belief. I think the attitude is in the right place with this team in terms of battling to the very end of the season, but there's still too many mistakes being made in flaws with this team, in my opinion.
Someone who wants to talk about those mistakes right now is Dave from Liverpool. He wants to talk about the Syracuse offensive line that was certainly putrid. Dave, what did you see out there?
Well, I'm just looking at the stats here online, and it's amazing that Syracuse had 39 rushing yards and Boston College had 313. So right there, that shows me that Syracuse, they're not physical. When Fran Brown might want to talk about being physical, I don't know what these guys do in the weight room, but they sure aren't pushing anybody around, and their defensive line and even their linebackers are really, really poor. Really poor.
No, they were really poor, and they could not stop Kai Robichaux from getting to that second level. It wasn't that they were in the right spots and just didn't make tackles like early in the season. It's that they were getting blocked up constantly. You saw 7-8 defenders in the box most of the time, and this offensive line, it just could not do anything today. Do you think it's something that's fixable going forward?
No. This team is not physical enough. It's been going on for years, actually, but I remember Fran Brown always talking about being physical, and we definitely aren't physical on either line. And I'm going to be disappointed if we finish 7-5 because there's at least a couple losses that are inexcusable. One is this is a terrible loss, and then the loss against Stanford. Stanford, they might not. I don't know what their record is, but they may finish up 2-10.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're 1-5 in the ACC coming
Correct.
into today.
That one win against Syracuse. Yep.
And I don't know if you guys have noticed what the football schedule is next year. But I don't see us having a winning record next year. I see us next year maybe winning 4 games or 5.
Yeah, unless they can get a quarterback in the building that's similar to Kyle McCord and, maybe replace Rondé Gadsden, who will be heading for the NFL. This team is going to have a tough time on offense, and they've never really had the greatest defense in the past couple of years. So, Dave, I share a lot of your frustrations. Thank you so much for the call. If you want to call in, give us at 315-443-2011. We're happy to talk about whatever you guys want to harp about during this frustrating time, this frustrating Syracuse loss. But we're going to have to take a quick break here on the Double Overtime. And when we come back, our WAER sports talk reporter Ian Nicholas is joining us on the phone. Ian sure has a lot of thoughts about this team, and maybe Sam and I will disagree. That should be fun. We'll talk to you on the other side here on WAER.
I'm Jesse Thorne. This week on Bullseye, we're going to wish Weird Al Yankovic a happy birthday.
Well, that's so sweet to hear. Thank you.
Plus, we'll talk with food writer J. Kenji Lopez Alt about one of the most important cooking tools of all time, the wok. That's on the next Bullseye from MaximumFun.org and NPR.
Sunday morning at 11 on WAER.
We know you've got a lot to do in a day, and sometimes it may not be easy to tune in at exactly the right time to catch WAER News. But WAER News is always available, wherever and whenever you are, without a paywall. Visit our website to use our live stream or catch up on local and national news, as well as podcasts on our website at WAER.org.
The Ostrom Avenue Podcast, breaking down Syracuse athletics.
The students rush the field. The Orange are bowl eligible and 6-0 for just the third time in the last 87 years.
And interviewing the industry's experts.
We are now joined by a very special guest. It's Emily Leiker of Syracuse.com.
Check out video interviews on YouTube at Ostrom Avenue Podcast and weekly episodes on WAER.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
Coming up this week on Mountain Stage, we hear Detroit-based rockers Brother Elsie make their first appearance on the show, along with Jenny Owen Youngs, Matt Pond, PA, Caleb Clotter and Reeb Wilms, and soulful blues and funk from Jeremy Short.
Hi, this is Matt Pond of Matt Pond, PA. Join us this week in live performance on Mountain Stage.
Sunday from noon to 2 on 88.3 FM WAER.
On the next Putumayo World Music Hour,
we'll scale some lofty peaks in search of music from the mountainous regions of the world. I'm Dan Storper.
And I'm Rosalie Howard. Join us for Mountain Music, the next Putumayo World Music Hour.
Sunday night at 11 on WAER.
Takes the snap, three-step drop, fires near side to Gadsden. He catches it, hauls it in the end zone. Touchdown, Syracuse. The Orange finally get on the board.
Well, that was one of the touchdowns for Syracuse today, but guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It wasn't enough. Syracuse falls to Boston College 37-31. We're still with you. Sam Reese alongside Ryan Bridges here on the double overtime. We're with you up until 5 o'clock. Remember, you can call into the show at 315-443-2011. You can also shoot us a text at 315-556-3929. And listen, this was the part of the show that I was looking forward to the most. Myself, Sam Reese, and Ryan Bridges here in studio are now joined by our WAER talk reporter, Ian Nicholas, who is on site at Alumni Stadium in Chestnut Hill. Ian, first and foremost, how's my neck of the woods treating you today?
Your neck of the woods. You're from Franklin, Sam. You can't sneak that one by.
Oh, it's close enough. Come on now.
He's already calling him out on the state.
I'm, if anything, this is my neck of the woods. My godfather lives here. I've been on this field. This is now my second time on this field in 4 years. Shout out my women's lacrosse coverage for Syracuse back in the day. It's good, though, Sam. I mean, as you know, it's been kind of a weird fall in terms of weather, so it's not too cold. It's like low 50s right now, sun setting at Alumni Stadium. It's absolutely quiet, just hanging out with some of the guys at the AAR crew on the field, and it's an awesome venue. And it was really great today. It was a great environment for football, Northeast football, and this place was packed, and it's a really cool place to cover a game for sure.
Okay, before we get into the X's and O's here, Ian, and really delve into it, you mentioned the atmosphere right off the bat. And, I know you've self-proclaimed yourself as a transformed Bostonian, it sounds like. But as a true person from the area, I find it hard to believe that a Boston College football game had a good atmosphere. So delve into that for me. And were there more Syracuse fans than BC fans? Because I would think there were.
No, I wouldn't say that, to be honest with you. I remember that Jeremiah Franklin touchdown specifically. I know you told me not to dive into the X's and O's just yet, but when the Boston College tight end Franklin caught that touchdown, he was butt naked in the end zone. Oh, my goodness, this place popped. Like, we had a legitimate stadium pop from Alumni Stadium. And that's the kind of energy that this program has now. I know they came into the day, 3 straight losses and all of that, but they've got a real leader and a local guy, too, in Bill O'Brien, who's obviously had success at both the NFL and at Penn State in the past. So, headed in, we came in today, and we were first kind of took back by all the tailgating. It was a lot of Boston College, a lot of Syracuse, just a lot of fans in general here really invested into this game. And then, the stands were a little empty 5 or 10 minutes before kickoff, but we were talking to some people on press row, and they said, that's usually how it goes. As the first quarter rolls on, more and more people will come in, and they did. I don't have an official number for you, but I think it was around 40,000 people here. It felt like it.
I'm very surprised by that. But shout out to all of a sudden, the BC fans showing up, because I can tell you there is zero talk in the Boston market about Boston college football. But maybe that tune's changing as of late. Ryan, I know you're from the West Coast, but that does surprise me a little bit to hear how great of an atmosphere that was, as Ian told us.
Well, it looked pretty packed in the stands when I was watching it on TV. So I mean, they even filled out the upper deck pretty well too.
Yeah, rare sight.
Ian, we got to get to this game. We got to get to a lot of the frustrations. One of them from Ron from Canastota. He says, this one is going to hurt like a stick in the eye. Ouch. 7-2 would have sounded so much better than 6-3 in early November. Why do you think the Orange are not 7-2 right now?
I think they're not 7-2 because they couldn't adjust on defense.
Sure.
Plain and simple. I put out a poll on our Twitter account at WAER Sports Talk, and I said, who do you blame for this loss if Syracuse goes on to lose? And that was with 3 or 4 minutes left in the game before it was truly decided. And I put Kyle McCord just because for clicks, to be honest, got to put the quarterback in there. Even though it wasn't really his fault today, he did fumble the ball away at one point, and it became a safety. And then I put the defensive front, and I put other. And, the defensive front, the poll got 50 or 60 votes, and the defensive front got 40 or 50 of them. So the fans agree with me here. It's really difficult to defend the run when you only play with 3 down linemen, right? I mean, Syracuse, we didn't really know what to expect from them defensively this season. We knew maybe they could mix some 3-3-5 in there, but we weren't totally expecting it. It was no longer Rocky Long or Tony White leading this defense. It was completely fresh faced with Elijah Robinson. And with injuries to that defensive line, Syracuse has been forced to play 3 down linemen, and I know they have a great linebacking core, right? Marlowe and Justin Barron and Derek McDonald. They've got guys at the second level, but not the bodies in the trenches.
Yeah, I mean, they lose Kevin Jobity. They lose Deion Tank Wilson pretty early on in this season, and we're starting to see the repercussions from that. It's a tough thing to swallow because you don't know how Syracuse is going to patch it up or if it's fixable going forward, and they got one of the best running backs in the entire country in Jaden Ott that they're going to face next week. Do you think this is fixable at all? Do you think that Fran Brown, Elijah Robinson can cook up anything, or is Syracuse just going to have to survive allowing 200 yards on the ground every game?
I mean, 200 yards is a big number. Obviously, that feels like the number over the last couple of games. Virginia Tech ran the ball very well. Boston College over 300 rushing yards today. I don't know if fixable. I don't think it can be completely fixed just because, like you talked about, Ryan, so much of it is a personnel issue. And it's tough to really diagnose the problems after the game with head coach Fran Brown because, a lot of what he says is he just needs to be better. But we need a little bit more than that, right? We need some real, definitive answers as to where his team can improve. I also think, Ryan and Sam, a big reason why Boston College ran the ball so well today is I don't know if Syracuse is going to play an offensive line as experienced as Boston College is the rest of the way. So I know you said Jaden Ott's a great player for Cal.
That sounds like an excuse.
But a running back, in my mind, is only really as good as his offensive line. We've seen it this year. Like Quinn Allen's a completely different player when the guys in front of him block for him compared to when they don't. So Boston College has got some hog mollies up there. They've got some 5th, 6th-year dudes. And Syracuse is not only thin but inexperienced on the D-line. No. So considering it's more of a personnel issue, I don't really know if they can completely fix it.
I mean, that's fair to say, you don't think they can completely fix it. After all, it is the month of November. This is what I was, arguing with Ryan, that we're so far in where if these issues are occurring at this point, I don't know how much they can do to correct that. But, I guess you do have to give BC credit for the way that offensive line performed. And yeah, I think I read something that the Eagles were one of only 6 or 7 teams in the country that have had the same offensive line every game this season. So they've been fortunate in terms of staying healthy as well. But I really do feel like that's an excuse, Ian, to give BC all that credit, because I mean, at the end of the day, you have to find an answer if you're Syracuse as the game goes on. No.
Well, first of all, just to close the book on just how good the Boston College offensive line is, I am a little biased there. The right guard, Jack Connolly, used to knock me out of my butt back in New Canaan High School.
Oh, my goodness.
Of course.
I know that guy's a real deal. Hey, he was invited to the Shrine Bowl. Come on, he's a good player. Sure. I mean, yeah, it's totally an excuse. But at the same time, I mean, you said it, Sam. I mean, it's so hard. I mean, you look at Syracuse every week on their own offensive line, which, we could talk about that for the entirety of your show, how bad they were today. They're shuffling guys in the middle of the game, right? And, what's Fran Brown going to say as to why he's shuffling guys in the game midway through? He's saying that because, he says, oh, well, I'm playing the guys on the bench so that they don't get stolen in the transfer portal. And while there might be some truth to that, he's also saying that because his offensive line is significantly underperformed.
Yeah.
Boston College hasn't had to do that. So going back to the defensive side of things for Syracuse, I think Murad Watson played a good game.
Mm-hmm.
I think Justin Barron played a good game. And I think that Marlo Wax is always going to play solid when he's out there on the field, when he's healthy. But they don't have the size, and they don't have the depth. They've got some dudes, but they don't have enough. So as I go back to, I don't think the solution to this problem, I know people are clamoring for King Joseph Edwards to play. He's a pass rusher. Yeah. He's a third down guy. He's not going to stop the run. So I don't know if they really have that solution on this year's team.
Ian, something that I noticed with a couple of the callers that we had, earlier on in the show was that there was a theme of this loss paints the larger picture of what is Syracuse going to do without Kyle McCord next year if they're going to have these kinds of issues, if they're going to lose Aronde Gatson to the NFL, if they're going to possibly lose Marlo Wax, Justin Barron, how is Syracuse going to go forward? And is this Fran Brown's best chance to reach 9 wins that we're going to see in a long time? Like I have less faith in Syracuse going forward into next year. If they can't fix all the other pieces around Kyle McCord right now, what are they going to do when they don't have those star players? What do you think of that?
No, I think you bring up a valid point, Ryan. That's why I don't envy Fran Brown, because you couldn't have much higher expectations for your first year as the head coach. And I understand people have given him a lot of credit for landing a guy in the transfer portal like Kyle McCord. But as Fran Brown has been and Kyle have been completely transparent about in the past, that happened because of a mutual connection a long time ago back in the New Jersey area, the South Jersey area.
Sure.
So, I guess my answer to you in the short would be Fran Brown's a pretty decent recruiter, right? Top 30-ish guys in the country. Heck, Syracuse is currently in the mix to land a 5-star. But that guy's not walking in the door next season.
No.
So Syracuse doesn't have those answers on the roster right now. Then could you go to the portal? Sure. Mm-hmm. But again, he doesn't have mutual connections with another Ohio State quarterback who wants to come here, or Ohio State linebacker. But you said, where's Justin Barron and Marlo Wax? They're both going to be gone. So much pressure on, and he's not only a first-year coach like Bill O'Brien is. He is a first-year head coach at any level of football. So he's learning on the fly. So sure, this year's roster is probably the best roster Fran Brown's going to have in the next 3 years.
Yeah.
I'll go on record saying that. I don't think they'll have a better roster in 2025 or 2026.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he might be a better head coach in 2025 and 2026, so who knows if that'll balance out.
I tend to agree with you there, Ian, and that's why I think already you can say, the way the season has panned out is disappointing. Between today's loss, the Stanford loss as well, I'm curious because you went to that Fran Brown press conference after the game. I've already seen a few of them over the last several months this season, and it's usually more or less the same from him, especially after losses, in terms of putting most of the responsibility on himself. Was there anything that stood out that he said, or was he pretty bland like usual after the game in terms of saying most of the responsibility went on himself and that they just have to look forward at this point?
Yeah, I'm unfortunately, Sam, I wish I had some inspiring quote from you or from Fran Brown, or I could make something up and fabricate it, but I won't. Yeah, he stuck to his guns. He stuck to the saying that he needed to be better. I wanted to address, because he mentioned, like you said, after a loss, he's usually pretty cookie cutter. But after wins, I feel like we actually hear the best version of Fran Brown, the most transparent version of him. And in that Virginia Tech post-game press conference, he mentioned that at halftime he went up to offensive coordinator Jeff Nixon and he gave him advice on how to call the plays, and to get the ball to Quinn Allen a little bit more. And look what happened at the end of that game. It worked. I'm not saying every time Fran Brown makes a suggestion it's a good one, but I'm just saying that's the insight we got from Fran. And so I asked him at the end of today, did you have conversations with Elijah Robinson, the defensive coordinator, who, by the way, has never been a defensive coordinator over the course of a whole season until this year? Let's remember that as well. I asked him, did you have a big conversation with him at one point? And he said no. So maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Maybe he was just protecting his coaches, which he's done a good job of all season, Nixon and James Villano and E-Rob, but didn't really get anything, I'd say, of substance out of the post-game press conference tonight.
That's why we send you Ian. You ask the right questions. You ask the tough questions. Sometimes you don't get the best answers, but I really love that question. Did you take anything from what Kyle McCord said?
Yeah, no, I think I do appreciate Kyle. I think he's transparent.
Yep.
He mentioned how he was under pressure a lot today, and they did a good job. Boston College did in mixing up their looks up front and getting to him. I asked him about how he has responded so far this season to playing under pressure. I even mentioned he ran for 50 yards on one play at one point. How do you feel like you responded to pressure tonight? He said overall he thought he did a good job under duress, but he did a good job under duress, but felt like he still could have done a little bit more. And he talked on Oronde Gadsden and, how Gadsden's a guy who he's always going to trust in those clutch situations. We've been talking a lot about this year, getting Oronde the ball a little bit more. And he even talked about tonight how Syracuse made a concerted effort throughout the afternoon to move OG around the field to put him in positions to succeed. For instance, on that touchdown catch for Gadsden, his first since week 2, which is crazy, instead of lining him up, in the slot or in line at tight end, they moved him all the way to the boundary as a wide receiver, gave him a chance one-on-one with a guy who's going to be much smaller than him as an outside cornerback. So, Syracuse is doing things tactically, doing things in their schematics to make sure that Oronde Gadsden can get the football a little bit more. But, yeah, again, accountability from him, and he does his job as a leader to make sure he's protecting his guys, but surely got a little bit more of substance out of Kyle than out of France.
And one more question for you, Ian. Maybe two, if we could keep it brief here as the time flies by when we're having fun with you joining us here on the WAER airwaves. I'm curious because Ryan and I talked about it, earlier in the show about how we both agreed that penalties were still a big factor as well for the Syracuse team. Eight penalties for 71 total yards, and there were just some silly ones like that late hit out of bounds by Clark. Was that asked by any media members to Fran Brown after the game? Was that addressed whatsoever? Because I think it's inexcusable for those type of mistakes to still be happening in November.
Actually, I'll tell you about one, because obviously there was a huge sticking point, which was that final call. I know you mentioned the Elijah Clark late hit, which was kind of reminiscent of the Quinn Allen unnecessary roughness from Virginia Tech, and also Justin Barron had an unnecessary roughness play in this game as well. That can't happen as a leader of this team. But Syracuse had a chance to win this game late, right? They kick a field goal, they make it a one-score game, they attempt the onside kick, and it was successful. Darryl Gill recovered it until a flag was thrown. And it was for an illegal block on an onside kick, which, Jordan Leonard was our color analyst today on the sports broadcast, and he knows as much football as I think anybody in our department as a former high school quarterback. He's like, I've never seen that flag before. You know what? Jordan wasn't necessarily wrong. Flag's only been in existence in the NCAA. The rule that, the flag was thrown on has only been in existence for 2 years. So, when after the game Fran was asked about what he thought of a call, he said that his special teams unit just needs to execute at a higher level. That, officiating crew told Fran Brown that his guys initiated the block too early. And Fran, there's fines involved if you talk bad on the referees and talk bad on the officiating. He didn't open up much more than that, but he seemed to agree with the call, even though it was a little controversial, and it definitely had everybody scratching their head from the Syracuse perspective.
All right, Ian, we're running up against it. As we sign off, I got to ask you one final thing very briefly. We saw you posting about it. Did you have some clam chowder?
I had some clam chowder, and I'm not going to lie, my stomach is starting to feel a little upset after having some cup.
That can happen.
It's too good, though.
It is.
I mean, you had a little hot sauce in there, too.
Oh, wow. That's
All right.
new.
There we go. Well, Ian, we really appreciate your hard work all afternoon long, and thanks so much for the insight. Safe travels back from Beantown, all right?
All right, Sam and Ryan. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, all right. That's Ian Nicholas, our WAER talk reporter today. Some really good insight from him as we wind down here on the double overtime, reacting to a disappointing 37-31 loss for Syracuse against Boston College. And as we wind down, Ryan, it's that time of the show where we have to sum it all up. Yep, drum roll, please. It's time for our final words. I'll let you kickstart things. What's your final word as we put a bow tie on things?
You know, I've already alluded to it. I can't help myself, Sam. I got to get my thoughts out. This was my most candid thought, so it was unfortunate that we had to save it till the end of the show. But Syracuse back in 2018 was able to reach 10 wins under Dino Babers. Mm-hmm. Syracuse today might have blown their best chance at getting to a 10-win season that they'll have for a very long time. And I know it sounds unfair because it's only the first year of the Fran Brown era, but we mentioned it. They're going to lose Kyle McCord. They're probably going to lose Marlo Wax, Justin Barron. They're probably going to lose Aronde Gadsden to the draft. You're losing a lot of these star players, and they can't get the little things right on top of that. You lose to Stanford, who might go one win throughout the entire ACC. It was against you at home off of a bye. You come out flat against Pitt, but that's a good Pitt team. We can understand that. But this Boston College win today, or this Boston College loss today, the Stanford losses, Syracuse has given this thing away, and they could have avoided a lot of the top opponents. Some of the top opponents they've beaten, like a ranked Georgia Tech team, a ranked UNLV team, they do a lot of the hard things on their schedule very well, and they do a lot of the easy thing, the easy things. They make them harder than they're supposed to be, and they have really blown an opportunity at a 10-win season, getting to maybe possibly a New Year's Six Bowl. I know that's in the college football playoff, but
it's all out the window.
They've blown a chance at getting an ACC title, and I don't think they're going to have one. They're going to have a chance at one for a very long time, especially with the schedule they got next year. They're playing Tennessee in a neutral site. They're at Clemson.
At Notre Dame.
They're at Notre Dame. They're at SMU, who's really good. They're at Miami, who is projected to be in the playoffs right now. At
Georgia Tech isn't easy. I mean, every road trip is tough
Duke,
this season.
North Carolina, you play Pitt once again. This is going to be a really tough stretch for Syracuse. I don't have a ton of faith in them going forward unless they can make a big splash in the transfer portal and in the recruiting. So enjoy the season while you can, Syracuse fans, because I don't know if you're going to have a similar one for a long time.
Well, that kind of weaves nicely into my final word, Ryan, because I don't think you can enjoy the rest of the season while it lasts, because sure, we're talking about 3 games left for Syracuse football, but guess what? We can already classify this season as a disappointing one for the Orange.
Okay,
I stand by that. Oh,
hey,
absolutely.
Hey.
And it goes along with what you were saying in terms of I don't think the future is as bright. This season was SU's opportunity to really make a statement. But the reason I say it's already disappointing, a 6-3 record, sure, they're bowl eligible. Yippee! I mean, half the teams in the country basically make a bowl. You got to be mediocre. You just need a 500 record. It's not that big of an achievement for the high expectations that were rightly put on this team with the talent they have. The fact that you lose to Stanford, who arguably is the worst team in the conference, and their only win in ACC plays against you, and you lose to BC, who is on a 3-game losing streak, and is one of the worst teams in the conference as well. It's simply inexcusable because this team, guess what, is the definition of mediocre. 3-3 in conference play. I get it's a 6-3 overall record. The only notable non-conference win was UNLV. I mean, Holy Cross and Ohio are teams you should beat. So I think people are gassing up this team too much. The fact of the matter is you cannot lose to a team like Boston College in the month of November. You can't lose that game against Stanford earlier. There were too many opportunities that were flushed away, really, by this team underperforming in certain aspects. And that's why I think there's a good chance they lose 2 of the last 3 games. At Cal won't be easy. They're going to lose to Miami. Sure, you can beat UConn, but it's still a disappointing season no matter how the rest of it shapes out, because I find it hard to believe that this team is going to surprise us and win these last 3 games.
I mean, I would argue that they could have lost even more games. So what do you think of that? That the fact that maybe they shouldn't have beaten UNLV the way they did, blowing, that lead, scoring at the end of regulation. You're just not impressed by any of that. You're not impressed by them, coming back against Virginia Tech.
No.
I'm just saying they weren't favored.
No,
I don't think they were favored against Georgia Tech. I don't think they were favored against Virginia Tech. They weren't favored today. They're just they're in games that they shouldn't have been in, and sometimes it has gone up, sometimes it has gone down. I don't think you can call it a disappointment. I'm just worried about going forward without those star players. What does the outlook look like?
Yeah, well, that's a fair point too. But when there's so much hype around this team, so much expectation, with, let's face it, one of the more talented Syracuse rosters we've seen in a long time.
I'll go with that.
You can't be 3-3 in conference play for a conference that's not that great. That's the frustrating thing too. A conference that's wide open, Ryan, where you didn't have to play a Clemson, a Louisville. You didn't have to play.
Very easy schedule.
Very easy, and that was a big talking point entering the season, Ryan, where this team starts off with a 5-1 record, and it seems like a lot of momentum's on their side. They get blown out by Pitt. Yeah, they have a great response against Virginia Tech, but what do you do the next week? You lose to Boston College. Can't happen. It's a disappointing season.
I disagree. I think this team could have gotten a lot worse in some aspects. You got a first-year head coach. I think you throw a lot of the extra things around it into it, and I think you like the output of the Syracuse team, but I can understand the frustration about wanting more. I think all Syracuse fans want more after today.
I mean, the fact that 2 of those losses are to Stanford and BC, that's where I point to and say,
I get it. Those are winnable games.
And it goes back to the easy ACC schedule this team had. In a conference that's wide open, your chances are basically completely shot now of getting anywhere near the ACC title game. We did have a text quickly from Brian down in Virginia that said they can still have a very good season, beat Cal, beat UConn, lose to Miami. That makes them 8-4. I would have signed up for that. I'm just skeptical about next week's matchup. Do you think they'll take down Cal quickly, Ryan?
I think they will. I think Fran Brown has always responded off a loss, and I think it will fuel them.
I think they do not get the job done. I think they win in another nail biter.
It's been pessimistic Sam against optimistic Ryan the whole show.
Oh, come on now.
Hey, that's just true.
Well,
I'm not saying you're wrong.
We'll see how that one pans out. Again, that will be our next football broadcast a week from today against Cal. That will be a 3 o'clock kickoff here on WAER. The double overtime runs until 8 p.m. But that's not our next broadcast here on the WAER airwaves because it's our favorite time of the year. It's crossover season, and our next broadcast will be men's basketball against Colgate. That'll be on Tuesday night, 7 o'clock game, 6:30. Countdown to tip-off. The double overtime will go until 11 as the men's basketball team attempts to improve to 2-0 against a pesky Colgate squad. We got some quick thank yous to hand out. A big thanks to our producer, of course, Jonah Weintraub, our engineer, Shrikar Rajendran, and our hardworking desk members, Nate Cunningham, Ben Chadwick, and Alex Burstein. For Ryan Bridges, I'm Sam Reese. As we say, have a great rest of your weekend, Syracuse, as the Orange fall to the Eagles 37-31.
Good night.